for it. So what I'm going to do, and there's a little website where I'll demo creating some data entry widgets that use terminology, and I'll put up the URL for that as well. It's eminently, it's a GitHub repo that you're welcome to clone, or there's a code sandbox where you're welcome to play along. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with authoring a couple of terminology resources. So I'm basically going to follow the use case that I presented in my previous talk about data entry. So I'm going to start with choosing some code systems, and in this case I'm going to define my own little proprietary code system resource. Then I'm going to build a value set for that represents the codes out of that code system that I'm interested in for my particular input scenario. I'm going to define a little map from those codes across to another code system, and then I'm going to do some UI elements that kind of tie all these together so that we can do type ahead entry of codes, so that we can do a lookup request, a translate request, and then even an on-the-fly value set expansion. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little custom code system. The example I'm going to use for this one is body parts code system. So I'm going to start by creating my code system resource. Is that big enough to follow, or should I make it a little bigger? I think that might be as big as is practical. Okay, so I'm just going to do this I'm going to start off doing this in Postman, just as JSON, and hopefully that'll work. At various points in this demo, I might do the cooking show trick of here's one I prepared earlier. So I've got some resources, but I'll try not to make those big leaps that you can't follow. And if you want to see the full resources that I've used, they'll be in the file server afterwards, and you're welcome to pull them down. So I'm going to start by defining a code system. So I'm going to just make it a resource type code system. On this server, I'm allowed to control the ID, so I'm going to control the ID in this case. So I'm going to make it say that the ID will be Jim. Every code system should have a URL, so I'll give it one of those. I'll call that Jim as well. I've already made a mistake. There we go. And the other mandatory attributes on code systems, so I need a status. So I can just make this a draft code system. I need a name is a good idea. It's not compulsory, but so a name and probably a title is a good idea on a file resource as well. And the other mandatory attribute is content, and I'm going to say that this will be a complete code system. So this code system resource will have all of the codes that exist in this code system. So I'll start out by making some codes in here. So I can say concept, and that's going to be an array. And my first concept, I'm just going to make a concept for which the code is body, and the display is, let's say, whole body. And I'll just close out the resource so it stops complaining about things. Okay, so there's my first code. Now, for my next step, I'm going to define another code, but I want this code to be a child code of that body one. Because what I'm going to do is build up a sort of hierarchy here, and it's not going to be a subsumption hierarchy, because if I make my next one, let's say, so I'll do that, I'll say concept, and I'll say there's an array, and the first concept in there, the code is the head, and the display is also head. Now, this is not a subsumption-based hierarchy. We can also already tell basically semantically, because it's not true that head is a body. So it's really a part of hierarchy. So we can say that up here. So we can say hierarchy meaning part of. Okay. So the next thing I want to do, so I might define one more child concept. I'll define a, let's say, actually I'll define a couple. I'll make one that is arm. Give it a display. And then I'll make one which is torso. And then I can do more levels of nesting if I want. So if I want to say there are parts of the torso, then I can again say concept. Let's say the heart. And that is the heart. Okay, so there I've built up a little hierarchy. The next step I want to do with this code system is I want to start adding some properties to it. One of the things I want to be able to do in this case is I want to be able to differentiate which parts of the body are lateralizable or not. So SNOMED people might know this, but I want to be able to say, like, if it's an arm, then I'm allowed to specify left or right or both. But if it's a heart, I'm not allowed to say left or right or both. It doesn't make sense. So whether the body part is lateralizable. So I can do that using a property. And the first thing I need to do for that is actually define the property on the code system and give a little bit of metadata about the property. So I can define a property element up here, and that'll be an array. And I can say the first property that I'm going to define is, I think it's code. And I'm going to say lateralizable, and type is Boolean. And then once I've done that, I think, then I can also say that I want to be able to filter on this property later on. So I can, after I've defined the property, I can define a filter. Again, that's an array. I'll say the code is, again, lateralizable. The operators, I'll have to check my cheat sheet here for the syntax. Operator, yes. Oops. Oh, back here. So the operator is a list, and I'm going to say I can filter on whether lateralizable exists, whether that property is defined for a given concept, and I can check whether it's equal to something that I provide. And then I define a value, and I say whether or not the part is lateralizable, something like that. Okay, so now that I've defined that property and the filter, I can define some actual property values on the codes. So I can go to my arm here, and I can say there's a property value where the code is lateralizable, and that corresponds to the code that I defined for the property up here. And then the value is a value Boolean is true. So I can start putting properties on the code system like that, and this way I'm kind of building up the knowledge that's represented by this code system resource. Now, as I'm going along, maybe what I want to do is check whether this is a valid code system on the server. And what I can do in that case is if I just put in a request here, which is a post, and rather than putting URL there, I'll actually put up what it is so that if other people want to use it, they can. This is a a Sandbox server for Ontoserver. If you want to play with it, you're welcome to. Please, please, please don't use it for anything production. It will fall over from time to time when we want it to. And sometimes when we don't. So what I'm going to do is, rather than putting up my resource, I'm just going to send it to the server and ask the server to validate it. So the validate operation exists on all fire resources. This server is able to do it. Oh, that's Graham's server. Oh, it doesn't matter. I've got the URL in there anyway, but I'll change that across to make sure I don't use Graham's server. So I can send through that validate operation, and if I'm lucky, hopefully I don't have to kick the server. Live demos are great. Yep, this is why you don't use this server in production. Oh, no issues. It did complete. Okay. It took longer than it should have, 28 seconds. No issues detected during validation. Okay, so that's okay. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one I prepared earlier. And I'm going to pop this up on our server. If you want to grab a copy of it, then I'll show you the URL where you can grab a copy of it. So I'll just grab all of that. This is much more of the same sort of thing. So what I've defined on this one, I'll put it across in Postman so we can read it. So this one's got a whole bunch more of these body parts in there. I think I've got about 30 in there, in a bunch of hierarchy. They've got that lateralizable property that I've defined. And they've also got a category property that I've defined, which is a string-typed property. I've defined I've used two category strings, which are organ or joint, which just say what kind of body part it is. Other than that, it's the same stuff that I've shown so far. So I'll grab all of that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a put request onto the server. I'm going to give it the ID Jim. And I'll send that through. And hopefully... Oh, why is this so slow? Okay, so that's done. That's updated that resource on the server. So for the next step of what I'm going to do, so I could just use the whole of that code system if I want to be able to select that. But in order to illustrate how value sets work, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define a value set that just pulls a bunch of those codes out. So what I'm going to do is just make up a value set definition. So once again, I'll start with just some raw JSON. And I'm going to start with a value set. So resource type is value set. ID, I'll call it GymVS. The URL, I'll say gym/VS. Status draft. Okay, that'll do me for metadata. I could do something like a version. Is a good idea. And then the important part is I'm going to define a compose. And what I'm going to define in the compose is a couple of includes. So this value set that I'm defining, what I want to make it is I want to make it all the internal organs, so all the organs in the torso, and I also want to include all the joints. So those are the things I want to include, but I don't want the stomach because people complain about the stomach too much. I'm only interested in all the other organs. So I'll build up a value set that represents those things. So what I can do for that then is I'll start with an include, and the first include I'm going to do is for that first thing that I said. So I want all of the organs in the torso. So I can say in this include, my system is so this will be the URL of the code system I just defined. So that was HTTP gym. If I just stopped now, it would include all of the codes in the code system, which might be what I want for some scenarios, but in this case I need more information. So I'm going to add in a filter, and I'm going to say, so I could have multiple filters, and I probably will in a moment, but my first filter is I'm going to say the property I want to filter on is category. The operator I want to use is equals, and the value is organ. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just to check how I'm going as I go along, I'm going to post this to the server and expand it and see what it gives me back. So I can go to, again, r4.ontoserver.csiro.au/fire value set $expand. So if I just post this value set to expand, it should give me back a list of codes that are members of that value set. Wow. And it comes back and it's found seven things, so stomach, eye, liver, skin, kidney, heart, lung. But I said I only wanted things in the torso, so I'm going to put a filter in here and say property concept op is a torso. So that's the second filter, and because these are in the same include, these will be ANDed together, so codes must satisfy both of these. So if I do that, it'll come back and it'll say now there are just 5. So it's got stomach, liver, kidney, heart, lung, but it no longer has skin or eye because those weren't in the torso. Now I also said I wanted to exclude this. I also said I wanted joints. So if I were to put another filter in here that said property concept category, sorry. Equals so if I were to put in another filter like that and send it through, it would actually come back and say there are 0 concepts that match that, because by having all 3 of those filters, I'm saying things that satisfy all 3. So things that the category is organ, the category is joint, and that it's in the torso. And that's not what I want. I want it to be, I want all these conditions. So I'll move that to a separate include block. Up here. So I can take out this filter out of this block, and I'll put it in as a second include object down here. And now if I send that through, oops, I got my JSON wrong. So I need to, yes, okay, so in my second include I need to once again say that I'm interested in the HTTP gym code system. I need to say that there's a set of filters and that the first one is this. Now I've got another, close the array of the filters. No, that doesn't look right. I have to, that one goes there. There we go. Okay. So now if I send that through, I'll have 11 concepts. So now I've got shoulder, elbow, stomach, liver, knee, kidney, heart, wrist, ankle, hip, and lung. So that's almost what I want, but then I said I wanted to exclude the stomach, so I can do that as well. So I can just go up and down. After my include block, I can put an exclude block, and I can do exactly the same things that I would do with an include block. So I'm going to say, again, the system is this gym code system. And in this case, I'm going to provide a list of concepts. And the first concept I'm going to list is going to be stomach. So now if I send that through, I should hopefully have 10 resources. So there I've got my 10 resources. So there I've defined my value set. So now that I've got it defined, I'll switch across to a put, and I'll change the ID across to gym_vs. So this has to match the ID that I've defined in the resource, and I can put that onto the server. Okay, so for my next step, I want to define a concept map. Now, I could go through the same sort of thing and edit some JSON, but just to save a bit of time and to show you another tool, I'm going to jump across to a tool that that we make available for editing concept maps. This is called Snapper. It's at actually I'll make it bigger. It's at that didn't make that part bigger. Ontoserver.ciro.au/snapper2. So I'm just going to start by making what we call a classic map, and this is going to say I'm going to map gym body parts to SNOMED, and I'll call this gym-map. So my source code system I'm going to say is HTTP gym. The source value set is HTTP gym/vs, and the target code system is SNOMED. I could say the target value is this default, which this is actually the SNOMED root concept. So this value set is all of the active codes in SNOMED, because when codes in SNOMED are retired, they're taken out of the hierarchy. So if you do an ISA, you'll never get active codes, inactive codes. But what I actually want is something a bit more specific. I want body parts. So I'm going to search the SNOMED hierarchy for body structures. So this is Shrimp. This is a terminology browser, again from CSIRO. What's happening? Am I online? Poor old R4 is not having a good day. Oh, is it? Okay. Well, I can just use all of SNOMED for now. That's fine. But this next part's going to be interesting. So I can just use use all of SNOMED, and I'm going to import all the body codes I'm interested in. In this case, I've got them in a text file. So I'll just pull them out of that. So these are my 10 codes that I'm interested in, and I'm just going to, I could look up the individual SNOMED codes and put them in, but hopefully we have a little feature that will do it automatically for us with a bit of luck. That didn't, there we go. Yeah, it's really slow. So this is gonna this is just a feature of our server that does a best lexical match. It's not a reliable way to write maps, but it's a useful tool in getting started sometimes when it works. Okay. Maybe not today. On my server, I actually do have this map already, so I can just pull it up and we can have a look at it. How much longer do I have?
15 minutes.
Okay, good. Wow, okay. That's not great. Okay, what I'll do then...
Is it the network that is slow?
Yeah. Yep, that's okay. What I'm going to do then is switch across just to have a look at how we can actually use these resources now that I've created them for some data entry scenarios. So I've got a GitHub site here, github.com Jim Steele term demo. And on it, it has a box called Edit on Code Sandbox. So this is a little, I'll pull it up and show you what it is. This is a little UI that I've done up. None of the interactions between the UI and the server are currently implemented, but it's got some UI elements in there with sort of callback functions that are ready for some server requests to actually go in there. Wow. Okay. At least this shows you that it wasn't just our server that's slow. It's the entire internet.
I got something.
Oh, you got a hotspot?
Yeah, I got a hotspot.
Okay.
If you go to Wi-Fi 1+5,
Yep.
that's it. And now it should work fast again.
Let's try it. We'll just go back there. That's much better. Okay. So now that I've got all of these good things back, I'll try and do my auto map. So if I load up my select all rows, and I'm just going to do an auto map. Hopefully. This is actually a bit demanding on our server, this algorithm, so I'll leave that to run. So what I've got over here, this isn't huge, but it doesn't have a lot to it. This is a little UI where we can try and wire up the interface to actually support some data entry. So I've got a Typeahead box here. It's not doing anything at the moment because I haven't wired it up to the expand operation, which we'll do in a second. Then we could do a lookup, we can do a translate, then we can search for some conditions. So we're going to start by just searching for a code in the value set that I just defined. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump across into the JavaScript. Now, this is done using Vue.js, which is a somewhat lightweight JavaScript framework. So it's basically HTML up the top here with some links into some JavaScript functions. And then down here, I've got some JavaScript that actually implements that. So for the Typeahead window, it takes 3 functions. It's got one which is the actual search function. It's got one that renders each of the results of the search as a possibility. And then it's got one, once you've selected one of those, that handles the submission of that selected code. So the first function that we can look at is this find body part. And what we're going to do for that is we're going to start off with so I've got the base fire server in here as a constant. So down in the find body part function, what I'm going to do is say that the URL we want to search is the base fire server /valueset/expand. I'm going to say that the URL for the value set we want is http gym/vs, which is the one we just defined on the resource. And then I'm going to say just give me 10. Count equals 10, so I only want 10 codes to come back each time that I search. And I'll say that the filter equals, and I can say it's the input that we pass in. And then what it's going to do is when that comes back down in this promise down here, we want to pull out the particular option that we're interested in. And so what's going to come back from that is, what's going to come back from the expand operation is a value set with an expansion element with concepts in it. So that's what I want to pick out. So I'm going to say data.expansion. I think it's concept singular, but we'll have a look. Okay, so now if I've got that, and then what I want is when I submit the result, I want to assign it into this body part code variable, and I want the actual code in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for kid. Something's not working. And I'm going to turn on my developer tools just to see what request it's making. Expand URL, filter kid. That looks like it should be working. We can see that it is firing off a request, but at the moment it's not coming back. And now I can't blame the network anymore. I think now this time it might actually be my server, so I'm just going to kick it. Just bear with me for a second. Oh, nope, it is the network. There we go. So I'll just give that server a kick so that other people aren't using it for a moment. Okay, so let's try that again. Okay, this time it is actually coming back with results, because I can see them over here, but they're not being rendered right, which probably means that down here in this fix me part, I need to actually fix something. So let's see if that's concepts. Nope. So let's go back to my value set and expand it and see what it looks like. So this time I'll do an instance level expand, which I'll just do as a get. And this should show me the structure that I could expect in the value set that comes back. Expansion dot contains. Okay. So that's my bug. So I can go back over here. I can change this to be contains. Refresh that. So now kid, and it comes back with kidney. And if I was to search for, I'm trying to think if there's anything where a single character will match two. H matches hip and heart. And then I narrows it down to hip. Okay, so now I've done so there's my Typeahead expand. The next step I want to do is I want to pull back some properties about this concept. So I'm going to do a lookup. So down here I've just got a button over on the side here that does a lookup. So I'm just going to wire up a call to the lookup function for that. In this case, what I'm going to do in this URL is I'm going to call code system, and when I select that, it will show me what the code is here. So I've got that stored. So I can say code system $lookup system equals HTTP gym, and code equals body part code, so whatever I pulled out of that. And then once I've done that, I want to say I want to assign the result of that into something. So I think that'll come back as a .code. So I'll put that into my variable that I'm putting that in. And now if I do this, hopefully, so I can search for my kidney, and then when I do a lookup on it, hopefully, nope, HTTP gem. What am I getting back this time? Console. Nope, it's not that. Code system lookup. Let's do a lookup over here to check what I can expect to get back. So it's property.code. Oh no, that's not right. Oh, in fact, I just want the whole thing in this case. So I'll just grab all of the data for this one for lookup. And now if I search for knee and do a lookup, hopefully.
You need to remove E from that.
Oh yes, I do. Thank you. Yeah, so there's the JSON that's come back in that lookup. And then if I wanted extra properties, I could do something like property equals lateralizable. And now if I do, let's say, my hip and do a lookup, I can see that the lateralizable property has come back with a value true. So I can query those properties if I want to. The next step, quickly, I can do a translate. So in this case, my URL will be concept map, translate. I can give it the system and the code. I'll save the code until the end. My target value set is all of SNOMED. So I'll say snomed.info/set?vs. And the URL of the map I want it to use is http gym-map. And the code is body part code. Now that will come back with something quite verbose. So what I'm going to do is cooking show this a bit. So this is just a JavaScript expression that pulls out the part of the JSON that I'm interested in. So it just busts open the parameters object, finds one called match, then it finds a concept within that match block and gets a value out of that, and then I can just grab that as well. So now if I do my knee, I can search for knee, I can do the lookup, and then I can do a translate, and ordinarily that would work as well. What I'll do, just to shortcut things for a final demo, is grab all of that. Since I think I'm out of time. Yep. So now if I do my search, I can choose my body part, I can do a lookup to get properties back, I can do a translation across to SNOMED using my map. Then what I've done here is I've got a little SNOMED ECL expression, and if you're interested in how to do that, come to Peter's talk tomorrow, which searches for any SNOMED condition, searches amongst SNOMED conditions where the finding site is that translated body part that I've found. So given that it's a knee, if I put in sort of CO, it'll search all SNOMED conditions that are where the finding site is the knee, and the code matches that CO. so contusion of knee, for example. And then if I were really clever, I could do it. I could then go away and do a patient search that says, show me any patients that have that condition using that terminology-aware search that I've put in. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a server that implements that quickly, although I think Happy might support it. So, yeah. So are there any questions about that? All of these resources are available, so if you want to do any of this stuff, I'm happy to share them offline if you didn't catch those addresses, which floated by very quickly. So any quick questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
When we created the value set,
Yep.
it was derived from the. When is it populated with the results?
When you call expand.
So if we change something in the original value set, won't be updated or won't be refreshed?
Well, if you've already downloaded the expansion and then you change the logical definition, yeah, your downloaded thing won't be changed. But so really, if you expect the value set definition to change, just keep calling expand.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be quick on a good server. Yep.
What about caching of external terminologies? SNOMED, for example, would you recommend to cache those locally on the server?
Yes. If you're building a server that stores these resources, yeah, cache as much as you can. But it depends what you want to do with it. Like with something like SNOMED, if you're going to get a query coming in saying search for condition where code equals something you've never seen before, then caching won't help you. Yeah. Or worse, if you get something coming in saying show me all conditions that are in this implicit value set defined by ECL, then you're going to need a terminology server. You're going to need to hit the terminology server because you can't anticipate all of the ECL value sets that could arrive.
Where would you define what the URL, for example, SNOMED /yes?
Yeah, FireVS. So that's in the fire spec. So hl7.org/fire/SNOMED ct.html defines all of the known things about SNOMED when you use it with Fire. So it'll say what the URL is. It'll say what the implicit value sets are. So there's a bunch of implicit value sets that you don't have to define yourself with SNOMED. They just exist as a URL pattern. It defines the implicit concept maps, what all the properties are, and how they should work. And the same exists for LOINC. And there's a growing set of well-known code systems that have their own page in the Fire spec that tell you information about how to use them. Okay, I think we're out of time. So if anyone has terminology questions, please come and see me or any of the other terminology speakers who are speaking this week who also know a lot about this stuff. Thank you.